this showdown today at the Supreme Court, where the Trump administration is trying to reverse a string of losses in a long-shot bid to basically rewrite the Constitution. You can see the outside of the court today. Some people gathered. The lawyers arguing for the Trump administration were confronted with their lower court losses. Judges have blocked Trump's now futile order that claimed he could somehow cancel the citizen protections that are in the U.S. Constitution. So this lawyer was pressed on why, on behalf of the Trump DOJ, they would even try to go and bring this case. In other words, the Supreme Court judges were asking, why should we even take what has been this losing case as an appeal? Here is exactly how Justice Kagan crisply put it in her questioning.
You're losing a bunch of cases. Why would you ever take this case to us?
You're losing. Why take it to us? That's a Supreme Court justice today referring to how the Trump immigration appeal has been a losing case for Trump, and it is not even close. Some stories are complicated. This one is simple. This is because the Constitution already very clearly states that people born here are citizens. All persons born or naturalized in the U.S. are citizens, period. This has actually been a point of pride that the United States has defined citizenship this way, uniformly. In other words, not by religion. We're not saying you're born here and you're a citizen unless you believe in this or that. No, you're born here, you're a citizen. The language is clear, so it's not even close when it comes to what lawyers call interpretation, because sometimes there are valid disagreements within the branches of government about what something means. Sometimes it's Congress versus the White House, or how an agency, which is part of the White House oversight system of the executive branch, how do they interpret a bill versus the lawmakers who wrote the bill? But this isn't that. Everyone knows the Constitution beats a president's executive order. And that's not a new or partisan point. If that were not the case, every president could theoretically cancel the parts of the Constitution that they don't like with a pen. So it's not even close that the Constitution's definition of citizenship beats a president trying to disagree with it. And by the way, that's not ideological. If you imagined a very liberal president who wanted to rewrite the Constitution to allow perhaps easier or more citizenship, they couldn't do it by executive order. And so it is with the reverse. Donald Trump trying, whether it's a matter of messaging or law, trying to cancel out and narrow citizenship in the Constitution with executive order isn't allowed. Not even close. That's the baseline for Justice Kagan's questioning today, which was so grounded in objective, kind of non-debatable legal history that one of her colleagues, Trump appointee Neil Gorsuch, said admiringly, basically as a positive from the bench, that Kagan asked better questions than he could have. So here is more of her exchange today with the Trump DOJ lawyer.
You're losing a bunch of cases, this guy over here, this woman over here, they'll have to be treated as citizens, but nobody else will. Why would you ever take this case to us? In a case in which the government is losing constantly, there's nobody else who's going to appeal, they're winning, it's up to you to decide whether to take this case to us. If I were in your shoes, there is no way I'd approach the Supreme Court with this case. This is not a hypothetical. This is happening out there, right? Every court has ruled against you.
Every court's ruled against you. You're clearly losing. Why even take it to the Supreme Court for what she is implying? We don't have a ruling yet, but will be a very clear, more prominent total loss. It's clearly a long shot bid from the Trump administration. That's why the order's already been blocked everywhere. It is not running anything. It's powerless right now because 4 judges ruled against Trump doing what I explained is not even close, trying to rewrite the Constitution by executive order to cancel out people's rights. This is a point that the immigrants lawyer emphasized because it goes in their favor how judges have already found this Trump order blatantly unlawful. So it was all pretty much dead on arrival legally, not close as a matter of how executive orders work or how citizenship law is handled. So any honest court process would land here, not break from it. And I can report that tonight, now that we've heard the arguments, the Trump appointees seem to join the whole court's skepticism today. That's clear in the questions. It's clear from a lot of the headlines and summaries from various experts. That includes Gorsuch, as we mentioned, and other justices who noted that this Trump long-shot bid was already found to be unlawful, unconstitutional in the lower courts. So all of that is bad news for the Trump effort. Whether they have some other strategy that's been discussed to clog or overload the courts, overload the system, try to kind of make everyone feel frazzled. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at a clear loser and say there must be some other reason. Sometimes there are, other times there aren't. Other times people just make bad or incompetent legal decisions. But another thing happened here that also cut against some of the Trump efforts. Justice Barrett, a Trump appointee, took the example of today's oral arguments, where the Trump folks are on shaky ground, to also ask about Trump's DOJ suggesting the radical, lawless idea that they could sometimes ignore court precedent.
Justice Kagan asked my questions better than I could have.
These district judges are not just doing universal injunctions, they're finding these actions illegal because they're exceeding existing authority.
Did I understand you correctly to tell Justice Kagan that the government wanted to reserve its right to maybe not follow a Second Circuit precedent, say, in New York, because you might disagree with the opinion?
Those are tough questions. They're always phrased in the sort of dry, respectful manner of the Supreme Court. And as a reminder, Trump lost big 7-2, losing the Trump appointees as well in that emergency order. But if you're not a total Supreme Court nerd, you might not keep track of how they do the hearings. That type of order, because it was on an emergency basis, didn't have one of these big oral arguments that are such a big deal and everyone goes to the court and we cover it, right? And so that's relevant today because what we're seeing is some of the possibly pent up negative questions and arguments from the Supreme Court to the Trump team that didn't have a real avenue there. I mean, they did rule against him 7-2 and said they got to facilitate the return of that detainee. And I'll mention a bit more about that in a second. But big picture, this is the chance for these justices to ask these questions. And they clearly have on their mind not only what is this, quote, losing executive order case, as they've been discussing, but the wider thing that's going on here. So let me turn to that right now with you. Put it very simple. In a healthy, valid constitutional democracy, politicians do not try to break the law. They don't tend to publicly flout schemes to do that or ignore some court orders. And while America has a very up and down history on a lot of issues, most of the time in the modern era, that hasn't happened. You'd have to go back to Richard Nixon to find a president who blatantly talked about it. And remember, he ultimately left office under a cloud for it. In Trump's first term, there were many extreme activities. I bet you remember them. But if you want to be fair about history, during the first term, until we got to the post-election coup era, they generally said they would also follow orders. So we're actually living through something that is distinctly different right now and legally worse. In this second Trump term, the plots about maybe ignoring or flouting court orders are pushed out in the open. We've had multiple officials working for Donald Trump talking that talk, saying maybe they'll ignore some court orders or implying that's a power they might have. They don't have that power. It's a sort of a bad cop, lawless cop approach where they say that stuff, while President Trump, who remains quite mindful of PR, will try to exploit that lawless mode. Maybe use it to see if he can shake down or intimidate various officials in courts. But then, in his words, he will claim he will still follow the law. He's repeated that even amidst these clashes where his aides say the opposite. So they've been doing that two-step. Today's case is about citizenship rights. The judge is blocking Trump's effort. But there is also the wider, ongoing immigration powers that Trump is trying to use to seize broader powers. He's leading an administration that has shown it will take any potential loophole to duck an order, as they did with that broadly worded Supreme Court ruling to facilitate the return of the mistakenly deported resident, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And that case is being litigated separately. So that's its own lane. It has to do with whether they can seize war powers, the Supreme Court said they can't, and whether they will ultimately facilitate his return, which they haven't yet. The wider theme, though, that I want you to keep in mind with the Supreme Court today is Trump officials testing those powers and using immigration as the arena that they want to see how far they can go. It's an incendiary approach, and it was a theme today with Trump appointee Barrett this is kind of interesting, pressing Trump's top lawyer at the Supreme Court about this longstanding duty to follow court orders and precedents. Now, that particular lawyer actually got this job after making those sweeping claims that presidents could be possibly immune from ordering murders, assassination of American opponents. This was the SEAL Team 6 scenario. That's an expansive claim where Trump's team is not only trying to move the goalposts, as the cliche goes, they're trying to convert the whole stadium into their lawless Trump enterprise if they can get away with it. So today, that kind of approach, however lawless, was discussed in open court. Now, the lawyer's using pretty kind of arcane, but I think sneaky language to say that while they know the law is follow orders, there are, now the Trump lawyer says, quote, circumstances where it's not categorical, meaning in Trump's DOJ, maybe they don't follow the orders.
Our general practice is to respect those precedents, but there are circumstances when it is not a categorical practice. It is, and that is not
This administration's practice or the longstanding practice of the federal government?
As I understand it, longstanding policy of the Department of Justice. Yes, that we generally, as it was phrased to me, generally respect circuit precedent, but not necessarily in every case.
No, that is false. When you go work at a long-standing traditional DOJ, let's say one before the Trump era, you don't get some handbook that says, yeah, we follow the precedents a lot of the time, but not always. And as you can imagine, as anyone knows from any rule in any job or workplace in history, if somebody has the power to make exceptions, then they'll make exceptions, and they might do it in their self-interest. They might do it in ways that are hurtful or dangerous, but the exceptions swallow the rule. That's another cliche. Now, when the rule of law falters, it doesn't always combust. It can, like the outgoing president welcoming clear violence to overthrow his loss and then pardoning those convicted seditionists. That's the red line that Trump crossed on day one of this second term. It was a combustible event. Other times, the decline of the rule of law can come through this type of jargon. A smart lawyer, like Trump's Solicitor General, trying to slowly, incrementally normalize what you just heard, which is not okay. That you can violate some court orders. And notice he chose to give that answer right to the Supreme Court's face today. So take it together, and these arguments were important for the big moments, as well as the arcane ones. The big moment, and what you'll probably see in a lot of the coverage in the headlines, is a court which does seem today to have put any Trump partisanship aside and come together on basic law, which is a sign that part of the system may be working. I also got to tell you, it's a low bar. It's lower than maybe even the screen, because of course, presidents don't have the power to cancel the Constitution with executive orders. As Justice Kagan said, why even ask the Supreme Court to deal you a loss on that point? But today we also heard one of the most controversial Trump lawyers of this whole Trump era, call him respectfully Mr. SEAL Team 6, because that was the hypothetical he answered. And we heard him cross a new line by telling the justices to their face that the Trump administration does want to seize power to ignore some court orders, that will be, he admits, their policy. So even as the court pushes back, buckle up for them saying out loud in court what they want to do. Emily, your view of what we heard from the Supreme Court today, and specifically what sounded like some justices using today's arguments to also surface broader issues like, are we going to remain a democracy in the second term?
Yeah, it was an opportunity, as you're saying, for the justices to probe these questions about whether the government plans to obey court orders and to just behave in the regular manner in which the Justice Department and past administrations have behaved, which is to assume that judges want to hear that they're going to be listened to and that the government cares about what they say and what they order. That's how it goes in court. Judges run the show, the lawyers show up, and they try to seem extremely interested in the opinions of the justices. And normally they say, absolutely, we obey court orders. That's what we're here for. So any deviation from that rule is startling. And I think that the Supreme Court, especially in light of the decision last summer that granted presidents, including, of course, President Trump, broad immunity from any kind of criminal liability, this same court is trying to probe whether the government is essentially changed and whether the court can kind of trust the good faith actions and words and compliance of the government with court orders going forward.
Right. And there are many cases, but on the immigration area, the test they've had thus far is they cannot trust them to operate in good faith. There has been no factual or objective good faith effort to return the mistakenly deported detainee, which was a 7-2 Supreme Court order. Now, there may be times where the word facilitate is loaded with more ambiguity. For example, if you said, let's facilitate the rehiring of 10,000 people to USAID, and you rehire some but not all, lawyers and normal people could debate that, right? Here you got one person, he's stuck over there, and you got Trump officials admitting we're not trying to get him back. And so I think that goes to this context. And Professor, I want to bring you in, but also play another Trump appointee, Kavanaugh, also pressing down on compliance. This, again, to remind viewers, because we got more than one thing going on, this is back to the citizenship order that's been blocked. And Kavanaugh wanted to make sure you are following that this is blocked, right? Take a listen.
How this is going to work. What do hospitals do with a newborn?
The federal officials will have to figure that out.
How?
So you could imagine a number of ways that the federal officials could.
Such as?
We don't know because the agencies were never given the opportunity to formulate the guidance. They would have 30
They're only
days.
going to have 30 days to do this. You think they can get it together in time?
This is discussing basically what would happen if they went and did this, while they're not doing it now because it's been blocked. Professor, given, again, your background in studying democracy issues in general, plus we have all of these immigration powers that the administration is trying to seize, your thoughts tonight?
What we're seeing and what we've seen since the beginning of this administration is an administration that doesn't believe in the rule of law. Not one that is simply authoritarian, but one that is systematically violating the law until it gets stopped. And that's not how the rule of law works. I mean, Americans should reflect on why we're one of the richest, most peaceful, most stable democracies in modern world history. It's not because of the air that we breathe, not because of the water, not because of something in the American character. It's our institutions. It's the strength of our institutions, the strength of our rule of law. And that means that there are a set of laws, and everybody, every citizen, every business person, every politician, no matter how powerful, obeys the law. And when told to stop, stops. Now, we may disagree with laws. We may try to change them. There may be occasionally differences of interpretation. But the idea that you have a choice, that you could either obey the law, or if you don't want to, you don't obey the law, and you push it until you're stopped, that's lawlessness. And that's the kind of thing that breaks the rule of law, that breaks institutions.
I'll let you finish, but that's gangster, right? That's how gangsters operate on a day-to-day basis. They know there's laws, they follow some of them.
How most,
but if they, yeah, well, hold on, I'll jump in and then you go. It'll be like your class. I'll go right back to you. But I just want to be clear about this in plain English. Gangsters follow some laws some of the time. They're not breaking every law all day. But the reason why they have more power in life is people know that they will resort to violence, that they don't view the legal limit on that as pertaining to them. And so societies that end up with gangsters in charge become very dangerous, not just for people who are against the gangsters, but eventually, and I'm sure you can educate us on this, for a heck of a lot of other people within those borders. And so I'm curious to let you finish your point, what it means if we have that lawless mentality now by not only the people in charge at the top, but lawyers and DOJ trying to normalize it.
Yeah, I don't even remember my point, but I think you said it better than I did, Ari. The point is when governments decide that it's a choice, that they can decide whether they're going to obey the law or not, you can very quickly weaken institutions. And it is a lot harder. And I study Latin America for a living. It is a lot harder to break institutions, to weaken institutions, than to build strong ones.